3,900 names on a list. No warrant, no hearing, no appeal. An algorithm made the call, and the city itself had no idea the list existed. This is the story of a company that set out to make surveillance smarter, more targeted, more precise, more humane. It would protect the innocent by finding only the genuinely dangerous, and only them. That was the promise. Here is what the promise became. Palantir Technologies is today worth over $200 billion. Its software runs inside the Pentagon, the CIA, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Governments across the world use it to map crime networks, flag visa overstays, and identify threats before they materialize. The company calls it intelligence-led policing. Its critics call it the automation of suspicion. And somewhere between those two descriptions, invisible to courts, invisible to defense attorneys, invisible to the people it silently scores, the ghost in the machine has already been at work for years. The year is 2001. The smoke over Manhattan has not yet cleared, and across America, a question is hardening into something close to consensus. The government had all the information it needed to stop what happened on September 11th. It just couldn't connect the dots. One man who believed the deeply was Peter Thiel. He had already co-founded PayPal and sold it to eBay for $1.5 billion. Now he was thinking about what came next. And what came next for Thiel was a question about data, not how do we collect more, but how do we connect what we already have. In 2004, he bankrolled a small team of engineers, Nathan Gettings, Joe Lonsdale, and Stephen Cohen, and tasked them with building a prototype. That same year, they brought in a CEO unlike anyone Silicon Valley had seen, Alex Karp, a philosopher, a PhD from Goethe University in Frankfurt, a man who had written his dissertation on social aggression, and who would later say repeatedly that he found mass surveillance morally repugnant. These were not cynics. They were idealists with a very specific idea. The name they chose for the company comes from J.R.R. Tolkien. In The Lord of the Rings, a Palantir is a seeing stone, an ancient device that lets its user view distant places and past events. Powerful, but in Tolkien's telling, also dangerous. Easy to corrupt, easy to turn against its user. They either didn't notice the metaphor, or they did, and thought they were the ones who could handle the stone. The CIA's venture arm, In-Q-Tel, provided several $1 million in early funding. Peter Thiel's own money, tens of millions of dollars, covered most of the rest. And the pitch to the government was careful. Palantir would make surveillance targeted, constitutional. It would protect civil liberties by making the intelligence apparatus smarter. The early years were not easy. Silicon Valley had no appetite for defense work. The prevailing wisdom in 2005 and 2006 was that the real money was in advertising, in social networks, in consumer technology. Who wanted to build software for the NSA? Palantir knocked on doors and got turned away. The company survived its first years almost entirely on government contracts, and even those were hard-won. The Pentagon moved slowly. The intelligence community was territorial. Every new deployment required security clearances, political navigation, and a willingness to disappear entirely from public view. But in 2008, something shifted. The financial crisis opened a door Palantir had not anticipated. Banks and hedge funds were drowning in bad data. Fraud was everywhere. Networks of related shell companies, suspicious transactions, and falsified loan records were nearly impossible to trace manually. Palantir's core software, designed to map relationships between people, addresses, and events, could do it automatically. Major financial institutions became clients. Banks needed to map fraud networks. Hedge funds needed to trace complex chains of related entities. And the realization began to settle in. This tool worked anywhere there was complex data to connect. Crime networks, financial fraud, public health outbreaks, immigration enforcement. The capability was the same, only the target changed. There is a moment in the history of any powerful tool where it transitions from purpose-built instrument to general-purpose infrastructure. Palantir crossed that line somewhere around 2008 to 2011. It was no longer simply a counterterrorism company. It was a platform for mapping the hidden relationships in any dataset. That is not, in itself, a frightening thing. Every data analysis tool works this way. What makes it different is what happens when a city decides to point that platform at its own residents, quietly, without telling anyone. In 2011, the Los Angeles Police Department became one of Palantir's first major American law enforcement customers. The pitch was everything that civil libertarians might have hoped for: targeted, scientific, based on data rather than gut instinct or racial profiling. No more stopping people because of how they looked or where they lived. The algorithm would identify the genuinely dangerous, and only them. There was, however, fine print. And the fine print, as always, was what no one read carefully enough. The data Palantir's software ingests is police data, records of who was stopped, who was questioned, who was arrested, and the data carries within it every historical bias of the departments that generated it. If certain neighborhoods were over-policed for decades, stopped more often, questioned more often, documented more often, then the historical record will show more crime in those neighborhoods. Feed that data to an algorithm, and the algorithm will conclude those neighborhoods require more policing, which generates more stops, more questions, more records, which feeds back into the algorithm. The output looks objective. It is a number, a score, a ranking. It carries the full authority of mathematics. But mathematics cannot launder bias. It can only formalize it. Studies would later find that Predictive, one related predictive policing tool the LAPD also deployed beginning in 2012, sent police to black neighborhoods at roughly twice the rate of white neighborhoods. The LAPD eventually dropped Predictive in 2020 after its own Inspector General found the underlying data was, in the Inspector General's characterization, unreliable. Palantir's contracts, however, continued. And in a city far from Los Angeles, a city that had already lost so much, someone had an even bolder idea. Not just to use Palantir quietly, to use it secretly, for years, and to make sure no one would ever have to know. While the legal questions accumulated, Palantir grew. In 2016, Palantir sued the United States Army over its procurement rules, arguing that the Pentagon was illegally blocking commercial software companies from competing for contracts. Palantir won. The resulting Army contract is now valued at over $600 million. The revenue numbers tell the story in a sequence. In 2022, Palantir reported $1.9 billion in total revenue. In 2023, $2.2 billion. In 2024, $2.9 billion. A 29% increase in a single year. 55% of that revenue came directly from government clients. In April 2025, Palantir's market capitalization crossed $200 billion. Its stock had risen 340% in the prior 12 months alone. At the peak of that run, the company was trading at roughly 491 times its trailing 12-month earnings. Not 100 times, not 200, 491. The total remaining deal value, contracts already signed, revenue not yet recognized, stood at $5.4 billion. This is the infrastructure now embedded in the machinery of modern government, growing every quarter, in every direction. And here is what the evidence shows about the core promise. Not one city that deployed predictive policing has produced a peer-reviewed, independently validated study demonstrating a sustained reduction in violent crime. The financial case for Palantir is extraordinary. The empirical case for the thing it sells to police departments has never been made. To understand what Palantir's software actually does inside a city, you need to go to New Orleans. It is February 23rd, 2012. Mayor Mitch Landrieu signs a document granting the New Orleans Police Department free access to Palantir's public sector data integration platform. There is no vote by the city council, no public announcement, no procurement process. The arrangement is classified as philanthropy. It is folded inside Landrieu's NOLA for Life initiative, a program to reduce gang violence in a city still carrying the wounds of Hurricane Katrina. Palantir is essentially donating its platform, testing its software inside a live city, building a case study it can take to other departments. What the software does inside NOPD, however, is remarkable in its scope. An analyst named Jeff Asher begins using Palantir's Gotham software to map the social networks of everyone connected to gun violence in New Orleans. Not just known gang members, anyone connected to anyone connected to a shooting, by proximity, by phone records, by jailhouse calls, by social media activity, by shared addresses, by car registrations, by nicknames and field interview cards. He calls the result the NOLA model. And the NOLA model produces a list, 3,900 people, roughly 1% of New Orleans' entire population, placed on a risk assessment database and ranked by their estimated likelihood of involvement in gun violence as either perpetrators or victims. They are never told. Their defense attorneys are never told. For 6 years, this list quietly shapes who police approach, which residents get pulled into intervention sessions, and which names surface when a detective runs a query at 2 in the morning. James Carville, the political consultant and paid Palantir advisor who helped broker the arrangement, speaks about the program publicly in 2015 at a conference. He does not reveal the details, but he cannot help himself. He is proud. And he says something that would later define the entire episode. No one in New Orleans even knows about this. He was right. For 6 years, the city council did not know. Residents did not know. Public defenders, whose clients may have been targeted partly based on a Palantir threat score, had no idea. The partnership is extended 3 times, automatically, without review. Then it is February 27, 2018. A journalist named Ollie Winston, writing for The Verge, publishes an investigation titled, "Palantir has secretly been using New Orleans to test its predictive policing technology." Winston had obtained internal documents, interviewed former NOPD officials, and traced the arrangement from the original philanthropic agreement through 6 years of secret operation. The city announces it will not renew the contract. The program ends. But the stops have already been made. The arrests have already happened. The threat scores have already shaped hundreds of interactions between police officers and residents who never had any idea they were in the graph. The ghost, once named, cannot be unfound, but the past cannot be undone. The New Orleans story did not slow Palantir's growth. If anything, it barely interrupted it. By 2022, Immigration and Customs Enforcement had awarded Palantir a contract to operate and enhance ICE's core investigative case management system, built on Palantir Gotham. The initial potential value was roughly $96 million. The ceiling on that contract has since been raised to $176 million. More than $150 million has already been obligated. In total, ICE has directed at least $248 million in contracts to Palantir across all its programs. But the most significant development came on April 17, 2025. ICE awarded a $30 million modification to that same contract to build what it calls ImmigrationOS, the Immigration Lifecycle Operating System. The stated purpose, in the contract's own language, to give immigration enforcement, quote, near real-time visibility into people leaving the United States. Not just undocumented immigrants. The breadth of data integrated across federal agencies means the system could, in principle, monitor any person crossing any border, in any direction. Defense attorneys still cannot subpoena a Palantir score. There is no court that reviews the threat parameters. There is no notification to the people being profiled. The architecture is invisible by design. And the remaining deal value stands at $5.4 billion. The contract pipeline is deeper than it has ever been. Here is the fact this episode has been building toward, and it requires no embellishment. Palantir named its core law enforcement software Gotham, after the city in the Batman universe. The dark, perpetually corrupt city that never truly heals, that generates its own criminals faster than Batman can remove them, that needs saving from itself, endlessly, without resolution. The people who named it Gotham know exactly what Gotham is, and now the software named after that city quietly decides who in your city is the threat. You will not receive a letter. There is no appeal. The score is assembled from the records you have left behind, the people you know, the calls you have made, the places you have been, the interactions that were documented without your knowledge and uploaded to a database you have never seen. The fine print was always there, It was just written in a language most people never knew they had agreed to read. It is tempting to call Palantir evil, to find a villain in this story and put a face on the whole thing. That is the wrong read, and it lets us off too easily. Peter Thiel genuinely believed that smarter surveillance was more humane than mass dragnet collection. The NOPD genuinely believed the NOLA model might prevent shootings in a city that had suffered enough. The engineers who built Gotham believed they were doing something more precise, more constitutional, more careful than what came before. Every decision, taken individually, was defensible. Every step made sense to the person taking it. And this is the pattern that will follow you out of this room. The tools we build to constrain power reliably end up extending it. The surveillance designed to be targeted becomes the infrastructure for surveillance that is total. The list built to protect a neighborhood becomes the list no one can audit, appeal, or even see. Palantir did not invent that pattern. It simply industrialized it. The algorithm does not know your name, but it knows the network around your name. It knows who you have called, who has called you, whose address you have shared, whose photograph you appear in, whose network maps onto yours. In that network, it is always looking. You may already be in the graph. You would never know.